I remember the moment with crystal clarity, like a snapshot frozen in time. I stood at the head of the long mahogany conference table, carefully sliding freshly printed acquisition documents into leather binders. The room was steeped in the scent of polished wood, expensive cologne, and authority. At the far end sat Nathan Carroll, our CEO, the man who ruled Carroll Holdings like a personal fiefdom. He leaned back in his chair, flashing his trademark smirk. "Mandy," he said, my name sharp as a punchline. "You're a secretary, not a lawyer. Stick to stapling, all right?" A few of the execs chuckled. I felt the familiar burn creeping up my neck, but I stayed composed. I simply nodded and laid the binder in front of him. I'd been with Carroll Holdings for 8 years. I began as an administrative assistant but evolved into something far more vital. I was the quiet operator, the one who remembered every clause, every footnote, every overlooked detail buried deep in a 500-page contract. But to Nathan, I was just part of the furniture, silent, reliable, and invisible. This meeting concerned the company's largest acquisition to date, a $90 million takeover of a European logistics firm. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation. The deal was nearly done, and naturally, Nathan would take all the credit. As I handed over the contract draft for his final review, I felt a weight forming in my chest. "There's a section here legal might want to double-check," I said quietly, pointing near the end of the document. Nathan gave it a fleeting glance. "Leave it." I met his gaze. "It's a loophole. Page 312, subsection D. It allows third-party purchase rights through dormant license clauses." He laughed loud enough to echo off the walls. "Mandy, I've got 3 Ivy League lawyers on this. If they're not worried, I'm not. I don't pay you to think." The room fell into awkward silence. Some smirked. Others avoided eye contact. I gave another nod. "Understood, sir." But something shifted in me at that moment. For years, I had endured the patronizing comments, the subtle belittlements, the glass ceiling sitting firmly overhead. I told myself it was part of the cost of staying in the game. But this wasn't just arrogance. It was irresponsibility. And I wasn't going to overlook it. That evening, I stayed late under the guise of finalizing meeting notes. The cleaning staff passed me without a second glance. After all, Mandy the secretary was always working late. Always invisible. But I wasn't writing notes. I was dissecting the contract. Line by line. Clause by clause. Cross-referencing every footnote. And what I found sent a chill through me. The dormant license clause was real. And binding. It allowed a third party to legally assume licensing rights by paying a nominal fee and filing a claim before the acquisition closed. The cost? $1. It was a clause designed for rare contingencies, never expected to be activated. But it had never been removed. No one had caught it. I stared at the text long after midnight, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from something more potent. For the first time, I saw where the true power lay. It wasn't at the head of the table. It was in knowing the fine print. That night, I made a decision, one that would change everything. But I wasn't careless. I knew I'd need a plan. And more importantly, I needed perfect timing. The clock on the deal was ticking, and Nathan Carroll had no idea that by the time they tried to close, I would already legally own the very thing they were buying. The next morning, the office thrummed with its usual rhythm. Coffee brewing. Phones ringing. Chatter humming in the background. I sat at my desk outside the executive suite, reviewing emails as usual. On the surface, I looked exactly how they saw me, the quiet assistant who never made a fuss. But inside my bag, tucked under my blazer, sat a signed check for $1 and a printed legal claim. I had reached out to an old college friend in corporate compliance who confirmed what I discovered. The dormant license clause was valid. Odd, yes. But enforceable. It had been carried over from a contract written 2 decades ago and, somehow, survived each ownership transition. According to international law, if a person submitted the proper paperwork and fee before an acquisition's closing date, they could assume licensing rights, specifically, the license to the logistics software at the core of the firm. Without it, the deal couldn't proceed. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't need to be. I just had to follow the process to the letter. At 12:47 p.m., during my lunch break, I walked to a notary office down the street. I signed the form, paid the filing fee, and submitted the claim. Everything was done legally and above board. I paid the $1 in cash. The notary, an older woman with perceptive eyes, glanced at the amount and raised an eyebrow. "Hope this pans out for you," she said. I smiled. Me too. When I returned to the office, everything looked normal. Nathan's assistant was chatting with someone from marketing. The CFO was on a call laughing about his golf handicap. Nathan was behind glass, bellowing about synergy. I sat down and quietly sent a copy of my filing summary to my personal email. Then I waited. For 2 days, nothing happened. I started doubting myself. Maybe I'd misread something. Maybe it wouldn't work. I had gambled my career, my reputation, possibly even my legal standing. But on the third morning, things shifted. At 9:15 a.m., a furious attorney burst into Nathan's office. They spoke in hushed, terse voices. Nathan's tone spiked once, loud, angry, then dropped again. By noon, the legal team was locked in the boardroom. At 1:30 p.m., Nathan called an emergency meeting with the executive team. I wasn't on the invite list, but I didn't need to be. The whispers in the hallway told me enough. Some kind of loophole. Someone had filed something. The license was frozen. The deal couldn't close. I kept my head down, typing, pretending I wasn't listening. That afternoon, Nathan walked past my desk without a glance. The man who had laughed at me 3 days ago didn't look so amused now. That evening, I went home with a racing heart. Not from nerves, but from something else. Something fierce and quiet and sure. It was working. But I knew better than to relax. Nathan Carroll didn't go down without a fight. He bullied. He threatened. He bulldozed whatever stood in his path. And now I was standing squarely in his way. The next morning, before I even stepped into the building, my phone buzzed. Nathan Carroll. His name glared on the screen. I stared at it, thumb hovering. Then answered. "Mandy," he said, his tone clipped but dusted with fake politeness. "My office. Now." I smiled faintly. He couldn't see it. "Of course, sir," I said calmly. As I walked past desks and whispered conversations toward his glass-walled office, I felt the weight of every gaze. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. Nathan was about to learn something critical. This secretary didn't just know the rules. She knew how to wield them. And this game? It was just getting started. His office felt colder than usual. Not because of the air, but the look on his face. He stood by the window, hands buried in his pockets, gazing out like a general scanning the battlefield. I closed the door behind me. "Mandy," he said at last, turning to face me. His tone was even, casual, on the surface. But beneath it, I could already hear the panic setting in. "Take a seat." I did. He didn't. "I've just been informed," he started slowly, "that a dormant license claim has been submitted against the handover acquisition." I stayed silent. His jaw clenched. "Imagine my reaction," he continued, "when I discovered it was submitted by my secretary. I met his eyes, keeping my face composed. I followed the procedure as laid out in the original agreement. The claim is legitimate. He gave a short, dry laugh. Legitimate or not, you had no authority. No clearance. You've blindsided this company and put a $90 million deal at risk. My hands stayed calmly folded in my lap. I simply exercised a clause that your legal team ignored. As of now, I hold the licensing rights essential for the acquisition to proceed in this region. His expression hardened. What's your angle? I blinked slowly. No angle, sir. Just enforcing my contractual rights. He went quiet for a moment. The silence felt dense, taut. Then, with a humorless chuckle, he circled his desk and sat down, hands clasped like a man about to bluff in a high-stakes hand. This is about money, right? He said. I tilted my head. I'm sorry. He smirked. Come on. Don't insult both of us. You saw an opening and decided to cash in. Name your number. I'll pay you off, quietly and cleanly. I held his stare. I didn't file that claim for money. The smirk slipped. Then why? I leaned forward slightly. Because you dismissed me. You treated me like I didn't matter. You ignored a clear warning. Just like you've dismissed anyone who wasn't in this room wearing the right title. I'm not here to negotiate, Nathan. I'm here to remind you, this isn't your default win anymore. For the first time, his confidence wavered. You do understand, he said slowly, that this isn't going to end well for you. I nodded. I also know it won't end well for you either. We stared each other down, the tension in the air almost tangible. Finally, he leaned back. You'll regret this, Mandy. I offered him a calm, measured smile. I'll take that risk. I stood and turned toward the door. Do you think you're smarter than me? He called out. I faced him again. No, Nathan. I think I read the fine print. That's all. Then I walked out. Back at my desk, the moment felt almost unreal. My pulse was steady, but everything around me felt heightened. Voices lowered when I walked by. People glanced over their shoulders. When a secretary walks into the CEO's office and comes out unharmed, word spreads fast. By late afternoon, the fallout had begun. At exactly 5:03 p.m., an email landed in my inbox. From HR, subject, formal inquiry into conduct. Immediate attention required. I opened it without surprise. They were launching an investigation into alleged unauthorized interference with corporate legal operations. I nearly laughed. Almost. I recognized the strategy. A familiar corporate play: smear, isolate, discredit before your opponent gains momentum. But I was already prepared. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Yes, I'd retained legal counsel 2 days ago. I wasn't going into this blind. Nathan still thought he was running the board. What he hadn't realized yet was that I had already flipped it. The HR move didn't rattle me. What followed, however, was more aggressive. The next morning, I arrived early, anticipating pushback. The first thing I noticed was my workstation. Locked. My screen flashed red, access denied. Contact IT support. I took a breath. At 8:13 a.m., I was summoned again. HR. 2 people waited, a senior HR manager and a corporate counsel I hadn't seen before. We've suspended your access, the HR rep said coolly, while we review recent concerns raised by senior leadership. I nodded. Concerns about a lawful claim I filed privately, with personal resources, and entirely outside company systems? The HR rep hesitated. We're simply following internal protocol. I leaned back, pulled a document from my bag, and slid it across the table. And I'm following mine. It was a formal letter from my attorney. A clear notice, any retaliatory measures, including revoking access or attributing false misconduct, would trigger legal response. The corporate counsel's mouth tightened. Is that a threat, Ms. Harris? I met his stare. It's a statement of fact. Silence. Finally, HR spoke. We'll discuss this with our department. I left without computer access, but with something more valuable. A trail of documentation. By noon, whispers were no longer whispers. They were murmurs, and they carried weight. She's on HR's radar. Can't believe she did that. Crazy move, gutsy though. I kept walking. I understood the game now. Nathan was trying to discredit me before the board or shareholders could ask real questions. If I resigned, it would prove them right. Undermining company business. Going rogue. But I wasn't going anywhere. At 2 p.m., I met my attorney at a quiet cafe a couple blocks from the office. He was calm, clinical, no theatrics, just strategy. He slid a folder across the table. We're filing a preemptive injunction. If they move on you, they'll have to justify it, publicly. I scanned the contents briefly. Nathan won't risk public exposure, I said. That's the idea, he replied with a thin smile. The next morning, something in the air had changed. The tension hadn't lifted, it had thickened, but this time, it wasn't directed at me. It had turned toward Nathan. Rumors started surfacing. Quiet, but persistent. How did she file a legal claim? Why didn't our legal catch that clause? Why is HR reacting like this? The CFO couldn't meet my eyes. Two senior VPs stopped whispering when I walked by. And then, something unexpected. My phone rang. The caller ID made me pause. Richard Clark, chairman of the board. Mandy, he said. We need to talk. I met him in a glass-paneled conference room on the top floor. Unlike Nathan, Richard didn't posture. He listened. For 20 minutes, I explained. The overlooked clause. My quiet warning. Nathan's reaction. The legal filing. The retaliatory fallout. Everything, fact-based, calm, and documented. When I finished, Richard leaned back, fingers steepled. You've placed us in a tough spot, he said. No, sir, I replied. Nathan did that. I followed the letter of the law. It was leadership that ignored it. He exhaled, slow and steady. You're not wrong. There was a pause. You've given us a lot to think about, he said at last. I'd ask that you refrain from speaking to the media in the meantime. I offered a quiet smile. I'm not seeking headlines, Mr. Clark. Just accountability. He nodded, more deliberately this time. Understood. As I stood to leave, he added, almost to himself, we'll be in touch. When I stepped outside that evening, the building behind me felt hollow. The glossy exterior still stood, but inside, something had cracked. Nathan believed power came from fear. That he could win with intimidation. But he forgot one thing. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose, and everything left to prove. By Monday, the office didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't something you could see. But you could feel it. There were no loud announcements, no headline-worthy dismissals. But you could feel it, in the hushed conversations, the darting glances, the tension that lingered just beneath the surface. Something had shifted in the company's atmosphere. Nathan wasn't striding through the office anymore. His glass-walled domain, normally open for all to see, was closed tight, blinds shut. And Richard Clark, the chairman of the board, was in the building. Meetings reshuffled, calendar alerts flickered and vanished. Executives were called upstairs for confidential sit-downs. HR kept to themselves, eyes down. Legal moved in and out of the boardroom like ghosts. I watched it all quietly from my workstation, careful not to insert myself. I didn't have to. This time, I wasn't just part of the rumor mill, I was the reason it was spinning. By noon, the speculation was in full force. Emergency board meeting. Compliance red flag. Leadership crisis. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. At 2:15 p.m., the call came. Boardroom. Now. Richard's assistant. No emotion in her voice. I rose, smoothed my blazer, and walked the corridor toward the executive floor. As I passed the reflective walls, I caught my own image, calm, poised, measured. Just as I needed to appear. Inside the boardroom, every seat was filled. Nathan sat at the far end, arms crossed, face drawn tight. Richard motioned to the seat across from him, leaving one empty chair between Nathan and me. I nodded and sat. The room went still. Then Richard began. We've reviewed the documentation Ms. Harris submitted, along with findings from HR, compliance, and legal. We've also brought in external counsel. He glanced around the room. Several board members gave silent nods. This acquisition has been compromised by a major oversight. That's not in dispute. The matter now is how we address both the business ramifications and the leadership lapses that allowed it to happen. Low murmurs passed between board members. Then Richard turned his gaze to me. Ms. Harris, you submitted a legal claim independently, correct? Yes, sir. You used no company time or tools to do so. No, sir. And the information you cited, was it publicly accessible? It was. The clause was part of the acquisition agreement, filed and available through standard channels. Richard gave a single nod. Thank you. He looked to Nathan. Mr. Carroll, were you made aware of this clause before the claim was filed? Nathan's jaw tightened. Yes or no? His nostrils flared. Yes. Did you investigate it? Nathan hesitated. I dismissed it. Silence. Richard sat back, hands folded. Understood. The next hour wasn't chaotic, it was precise. Calculated. The board walked step by step through Nathan's failures. His refusal to follow up. His decision to ignore the red flag. His push to retaliate using HR. The formal complaint I filed with legal backing. Each move he made to undermine me now stood as evidence of his misjudgment. He tried to pivot. Excuses. Deflection. He blamed legal for not flagging it, hinted that I acted out of personal vendetta. But the room didn't buy it. They didn't have to. The facts stood louder than anything I could have said. Eventually, Richard closed his folder. Effective immediately, Nathan Carroll is placed on administrative leave pending full review. Interim leadership will be announced shortly. Nathan moved to object, but Richard raised a hand. You'll collect your personal effects under supervision. Your access has been revoked. Nathan's face darkened, flushed with disbelief. He turned toward me, not with rage, but stunned silence. I held his gaze, calm and clear. He said nothing. For once, he had no words. As the boardroom cleared, Richard asked me to stay a moment. You handled this with professionalism and poise, he said quietly. That hasn't gone unnoticed. Thank you. He nodded once. We're going to need your guidance managing what comes next. Hanover's legal team is already circling. I'm ready. And I meant it. Because this wasn't about payback anymore. It was about the principle Nathan never understood: protecting the company starts with accountability. 2 days later, the official word came through. Nathan had stepped down as CEO for personal reasons. No all-hands meeting. No glowing tribute. Just a sterile internal memo sent out before 9 a.m. No one bought it. The office hummed with speculation. The board forced him out. He almost blew the deal. And the secretary? She took him down. I said nothing. Because gossip didn't interest me. The deal did. With Nathan gone, the handover acquisition regained momentum, but this time, it was being done the right way. Richard Clark was named interim CEO. He restructured the deal team and, to my surprise, invited me to join. Not as an assistant. Not as an observer. As a named advisor. You understand the stakes, he told me during our first planning session. And you see what others miss. I accepted, on my terms. I wanted direct input on compliance and contract review. I wanted a voice, not a seat-warming role. No more layers between my words and decision-makers. Richard didn't flinch. Done, he said. For 2 weeks, I worked alongside legal, combing through every clause of the deal. Hanover's attorneys were meticulous, and this time, cooperative. They'd heard about what almost sank the deal. And they weren't taking chances. When the agreement was finalized, it was watertight. No ambiguities. No overlooked terms. No egos left unchecked. The industry took notice, not because of the deal's scale, but because of its transparency. No PR spin. No buried mistakes. One night, after the final signatures were in, I stood alone in the empty conference room, looking out over the city. 8 years. 8 years of being ignored, underestimated, passed over. When I started here, I thought diligence and humility would earn respect. I learned the hard way that sometimes, you have to claim it. Take a stand when others expect you to fall in line. Be firm when the easy choice is to stay quiet. And above all, know your own value before anyone else does. A few minutes later, Richard joined me, 2 coffees in hand. He handed me one and sat. The board's been talking, he said. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. He gave a dry smile. They want you to stay on. Not just with the deal. We're creating a new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy. It reports directly to the board. I stared at him. That's a real position. It is now. I took a breath. Why me? His smile softened. Because you didn't just save us from a costly mistake. You saved us from ourselves. And you did it with integrity. No agenda. No grandstanding. I held his gaze. Thank you. He nodded once. You earned it. The next day, I moved into my new office. It wasn't glamorous, no skyline views, no gold letters on the door. But I didn't need any of that. What mattered was this. I had a seat at the table. I had a voice. And no one else in this company would have to fight through silence alone again. As for Nathan, I heard he took a consulting job somewhere out west. Smaller stage. Fewer eyes. Maybe he'd learned something. Maybe not. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Some battles are about survival. Others about principle. And sometimes, you fight not to win, but to make sure silence never becomes standard. I never set out to topple anyone. I just refused to vanish quietly. And that made all the difference.